Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. This week's episode features a return appearance by Carlos Tanner from the Ayahuasca Foundation. As you may recall from our previous conversation a few months ago, that Carlos did say that he had a lot to share about the Dieta, and I've invited him back on to the podcast to talk all about it. We had a fascinating conversation last week. I'm really excited to bring it to you this week. But of course, we have a few quick announcements before we get to our conversation. I would like to say thank you to James and Brooke, who have made their regular monthly contributions in support of this podcast via a monthly PayPal donation. If you'd like to support this podcast, it is quite easy and also very much appreciated. Just stop by my personal webpage at martinball.net and use the PayPal link at the top right of the page. Other than James and Brooke and a few others who make monthly contributions, it has been quite a while since anyone else out there in listener land has brought their support over here to the podcast, though I have had a few people join up over at Patreon over the past month, so thank you to them, and I've already thanked them here on the podcast. But I do rely on the support of listeners, people like you. Yes, you, the person listening to this now. I do rely on the support of listeners to help pay for all the time and energy that goes into putting on this podcast, not only the time interviewing people, but also the time doing research, reading all the books, following up on people's videos, and all the rest of it. It does take quite a bit of time to put out this podcast every week, and your support helps support me while I do all of that. So, if you want to make an end-of-the-year contribution, that would be so totally fantastic. I would gladly accept that, and thank you here on the podcast on the next episode. Something else that I wanted to bring to your attention is Tom Hatsis has an event coming up. For those of you who are, a friend of mine on Facebook, I did the little air quotes when I said that because, I don't know most of you who are my friends on Facebook. But anyway, Tom has been here in Ashland for the past week now, and we have been going through a very challenging process of doing the audiobook for The Witch's Ointment, which is just filled with Latin and German and French and all kinds of crazy names. And so that's been quite the experience. And Tom and I have been busy at work on that. But coming up this week on Thursday, December 16th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, Tom is hosting an online event. It's the Origins of the Psychedelic Santa Story. And just his description here is one of the more intriguing ideas that crops up every December is the shamanic origins of modern Christmas celebrations and its main pop culture icon, Santa Claus, who seems to have a long historical association with the Amanita muscaria, the classic red and white mushroom of fairies and Smurf villages. This mushroom is psychoactive and has been used as an entheogen and or recreational intoxicant by various peoples in Mesoamerican and Eastern and Western European regions at different times in history. It is often maintained that our modern ideas about Santa Claus and Christmas traditions in general are echoes from Siberian shamanic uses of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. In this talk, psychedelic historian Tom Hatsis uncovers the true cultural origins of the holidays and how the story of the psychedelic Santa entered history. We will dive deep into the roots of this holiday and uncover the truths, fictions, and everything in between. And he goes on. You can register. Well, you should go to his invite on Facebook. Just look up Origins of the Psychedelic Santa Story on Facebook, and there's a link there for the Eventbrite ticket purchase. And it's a sliding scale of $3 to $20. There's also going to be a Q&A after the talk. And again, that is at 6 p.m. Pacific time this Thursday, December 16th, an online event talking about jolly old St. Nick. Just, a spoiler, Tom, as a psychedelic historian, he researches all this stuff. And to put it in Tom's own language, the psychedelic Santa is bullshit. And if you want to find out why and get the actual historical facts, go to Tom's talk. And hey, if you haven't read The Witch's Ointment, once the audiobook is out, you can enjoy the production that he and I have made of that and get the true details about the witch's ointment and wise women use of entheogens, mostly nightshade, henbane, datura, things like that in medieval European history, and how it got turned into witchcraft and demonology and all that great stuff. The stuff that they burn people for and, torture them. Boy, there's been a lot of torture in the book. Anyway, that's been a lot of rambling, but I wanted to bring that information to you. Here is Carlos Tanner, part 2, talking about Dieta and how that relates to ayahuasca shamanism and practice. Enjoy, and don't forget to support the Entheogenic Evolution podcast with a donation via PayPal. Be awesome. Thanks so much. Love you. Talk to you later. Bye. Yeah, well, today, as we discussed in our previous conversation, which was a couple months ago now, that we wanted to bring you back on for part 2 to talk about the Dieta and really just the whole science and philosophy and worldview behind it. And kind of what I was thinking would be very interesting that, I know that there is kind of an overarching view of what the Dieta is and how it works and how you engage in it. But what I wanted to ask you was maybe if you could kind of like we did before, if you told us the story of how you got into ayahuasca and the different mentors that you worked with and how that shifted and changed over time. I'm really curious of your own personal story of how you got introduced to the Dieta and kind of what were the steps along the way and how you were experiencing that. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe you can personalize it and then maybe we can get a little bit more abstract about it and then get into how you incorporate that into your retreats and your work that you do with people. So that's kind of my vision of what the overarching conversation could be about today. And you're welcome to take it anywhere you want because you're the expert on it. I certainly am not when it comes to Dieta.
Well, I appreciate your humility and your kind words, but let's be real. Maybe you're a kindergartner talking to a second grader, where you think that the second grader's the expert. But I definitely am not at the level of my teachers by any means, nor am I with the deepest understanding. I learn continuously, and I'm still trying to figure it out. I would say that I was about 10 years in when I started to feel confident that I even knew what a Dieta was. But let's get into it.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why it took me 10 years was because my first teacher, Don Juan, who unfortunately passed away in July, he didn't want me to do dietas. And honestly, in the beginning, I went down to the Amazon in 2003. I went to live with Don Juan in January of 2004. And that might not seem like that long ago, but in terms of understanding the tradition, we've come a long way and yet still have so much to go. And so the concept of Dieta just wasn't a part of my vocabulary. It wasn't people weren't talking about dietas 18 years ago. And so it didn't really come up. When I went down, I wasn't I'm going to do dietas. Mm-hmm. I was studying with an ayahuasquero and I didn't even know, I didn't know much, I guess. So I learned later he was an ayahuasquero because I learned that there were other branches within the field of curanderismo or within the field of shamanism. And I thought ayahuasqueros was it. If you worked with ayahuasca, then you were a shaman, and the shaman was this guy. But anyway, when I did learn about dietas and spoke to him about them, because he would tell me about them, mm-hmm. In passing, he'd be like, "Oh, I dieted this plant for a year," and so that's how I came to learn that this was a thing. There was this process called dieting, and And so I would say, well, I want a diet. Like you tell me that, you're a maestro because you did these diets and I'm your student. Like, let's do this. Like, I'm ready to do it. Like, whatever it is, I don't even know what it is, but like you're saying that it's like what made you the maestro you are, and I want to be like you, so let me do it. But he was like, no, no, you can't do a dieta. Like, he wouldn't. There wasn't even an idea for him, and it was frustrating for me to have him like kind of negate my desire to do what he also was kind of like, I don't want to say bragging, but he was like attributing his
Mm-hmm.
skills to this practice. So I learned about what a dieta was very vaguely from him,
Well,
but I wasn't allowed to experience it from him.
so let me. I have two questions for you, Carlos, and one is that before you mentioned that later you kind of perceived that he was maybe sort of intentionally holding you back a little bit, sort of to keep you around. Anybody who hasn't heard our previous interview, go back and listen to that one. Is just from a couple months ago. It's still up on the podcast, and we get into all of those dynamics. So I'm wondering if maybe that was part of it, and then also I wonder if at this point, if you could just give us maybe what you think is like a good cultural translation, because we're using the word dieta in Spanish, and then in English it would be diet,
Hmm.
and we're talking about something that's really different from, hey, I'm going on a diet, right? The idea that I'm going
Right.
to change what I eat in order to lose weight or detoxify or whatever it is that people go on a diet for. And even though we're using the same word, that's definitely not the same concept. So those are the two questions that are just immediately popping
Yeah.
into mind. Do you feel he was intentionally keeping you from it? And then can we gloss the word dieta in English in maybe it'll take a few sentences to really explain what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I do recognize that I did feel that way at the end of 4 years of living with him, that he was perhaps holding me back intentionally. At the time, I felt like it was probably like one of two things. One, it was that I still didn't really know what I was getting into and wasn't ready to do a dieta, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is pretty fair to say. Even if he was intentionally holding me back, it was also fair to say that I wasn't ready
Yeah.
to do a dieta. And then the other one, maybe because I was a gringo and this, wasn't my like life's path, that maybe there was this idea that gringos shouldn't do plant dietas, um, which I don't really feel as much. I mean, he took me on as a student, but it is an idea that has floated around in
Mm-hmm.
circles,
Mm-hmm.
like that this isn't for gringos, like maybe gringos could be defined better as this isn't for white people to do. And I can't really knock, like, white people don't have exactly a great track record when it comes to indigenous culture.
Yeah.
We haven't really proven ourselves to be a respectful culture towards others. So, whatever. But at the time, I certainly didn't think it was. It wasn't really till the end, and I guess at the end I could have said that, but it was early on that he kind of suggested that. I don't know. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's passed on. I love him so much anyway. So let's go with I wasn't ready for the dieta because that's a reality.
Yeah.
The second part, what the hell am I talking about? I wish that it wasn't called a dieta. I didn't come up with the name. I wish that it wasn't, because I think it's a very confusing name, because we have something that we call a diet, which typically means that you're trying to lose weight. That's like the most common reason for doing a diet, which is so different, and it's everything wrong. The diet for us is so much about what you eat, and that's why, because of that overlap, it's so confusing. A dieta has nothing to do with losing weight, even though you probably will. And it has very little to do with what you eat. And that was something that took me a long time to actually recognize. What I wish that it was called would be more akin to calling it marriage or friendship or a relationship. because that is truly what it is, and it's a process to build a relationship with a plant or the spirit of a particular plant. So you would do a dieta with a plant. You would diet a plant. Those would be like the terms that you'd use. And so if you'd say like I've done plant dieta, someone would most likely say, "Oh, what did you diet?" or "Which plant?"
Mm-hmm.
and "Did you diet with?" And then you would say, "Oh, I did ajo sacha," which is me leading myself into my next teacher, Doña Otilia, who gave me my first dieta.
Okay, if I could just
So,
if I could
yeah,
interrupt you
yeah.
before we get into that, and at this point, maybe we could just make it clear. I'm making this assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong. And this is completely distinct from the abstentions that are usually asked for in traditional ayahuasca culture to abstain from like salt and things like that before having an ayahuasca ceremony. So, which also could be interpreted as like a diet in a sense, like don't eat these things, don't consume these things before your ayahuasca session. And this is just a completely different world than that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was a black and white speaker. I am so like shades of gray in that. So, yes and no is
Okay.
my answer to that, because the ayahuasca diet, as I will call what you just described,
Mm-hmm.
which is a way to help you prepare yourself to drink ayahuasca, um, I may have inadvertently like invented that, to be honest, but it is based on plant dietas. So it isn't entirely different. There are intentions that are very similar, and there are benefits and outcomes that are similar. I would love to like comment more on the preparation diet also, but I'll tell you the one funny story. So I was on a diet and I went into town, which isn't a very good idea, but sometimes you do have to do things like go into town and use the internet. And I was very hungry. You do have food restrictions on a plant dieta, and this was before there was ayahuasca diet. This was, before there really was ayahuasca tourism. And I went to a restaurant that I knew, the owner and the waitresses and waiters, and I said, "Can you prepare me this special meal because I'm on a diet? So can you make this meal where it's just grilled fish, no oil, no salt, no seasoning? Can you boil some potatoes and boil some yuca, and that's it?" And they were like, "Yeah, I think we can do that." And then I said, there's probably other people like me that would like to order a dish like this, who find themselves in town, or maybe they're staying at a hotel, and they would order it if it was on your menu. So you might want to like put this as an offering on your menu. They brought me a whiteboard, and I wrote that little simple meal onto the whiteboard, and at the top I just decided to call it ayahuasca diet.
Mm.
And so they hung that sign that said ayahuasca diet with this special meal, and then the restaurant next to them, which was the Yellow Rose of Texas, decided to copy it. So they created the ayahuasca diet on a whiteboard out front their restaurant. And so then the ayahuasca diet became like this thing. At first it was like one meal, but then other restaurants opened and started like diversifying their ayahuasca diet menus to now, if you go to Iquitos, Peru, there's 4 or 5 restaurants that have a page or two in their menus that it's called ayahuasca diet. So I don't know if I totally take credit for that, but that is a story that definitely is true. But yeah, so it was based on a true plant dieta, and there is benefit to it. But I think again, and this is what we'll get into, I hope, is that because of the word diet, it gets stuck in what you're eating,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I prefer relationship. And so to go a little bit deeper with that, in a relationship, there are rules that are sometimes literally spoken, like if you had a prenuptial agreement or or something, there would be literal rules to it, but most of the time relationships have unspoken rules. And by relationships, I mean any kind, but marriage is a perfect example because it is a contract. It does have literal like rules that both parties agree to follow. But in even a simple friendship, there are these unspoken rules. And if you have a male friend, for example, what's an unspoken rule that you and your male friend would typically have, like a common one?
Um, Gosh, you're asking a person with not many friends.
Oh, well, one is that you don't date your friend's exes.
Okay, that's a good one.
That's like nobody actually talks about it, but it is known. Like if you were to do that, you would be like in violation of the terms of your friendship. That wouldn't be the way you describe it, but that's the way I'm choosing to describe it. The same way that if you were to be unfaithful to your spouse, you would be in like violation of the terms of the contract of marriage. And
Yeah.
in your divorce, should it go there, that would come up as like points against you. You would like lose the case, so to speak. And in a prenuptial agreement, that might be like the difference of millions of dollars or whatever. So that to me is a better understanding. And it's not there are rules to follow, but your relationship is not defined by those rules. And so when you're doing a diet to lose weight, that what you're eating, it's the end game. But in a plant diet, the end game is having the deepest connection and relationship with another being, another conscious being, which happens to be a spirit of a plant. And so in that sense, the following of the rules is an expression. And to like go back to the marriage thing. So let's say like we both know that when you're married, you don't have intimate relations with other people. The fact that you don't have intimate relations with other people doesn't give any measure to the quality of your marriage. It's
Hmm.
like you can't say to someone, "Oh, you're married. Have you cheated or are you cheating on your spouse?" And if they say no, you can't say, "Well, then you must have a great marriage."
Right.
It's just not it's not a qualitative measurement that you're following the rules. Now you could say, no, yes, I am cheating on my spouse. Then you could probably say, well, you're not, you probably aren't in a good marriage. That would be fair. But the fact that you are following it doesn't actually have much bearing in the quality of the relationship. And that to me is like a very important detail, because there's this idea about what it means to do a good dieta, a plant dieta. And it, oftentimes if we're looking at it in the same terms of a diet, like a weight loss diet, then doing a good dieta is not, I didn't eat any salt. I didn't eat any oil. I didn't eat any sugar. I haven't had any alcohol. I haven't masturbated or had any sexual activity. So I'm doing a good dieta. And that is like I think it would be easy to understand how that could be assumed,
Hmm.
because if you're still looking at it like a weight loss diet, but that would be like saying, I'm in a great marriage. I'm not cheating on them. I'm not breaking any of the relationship rules. So I'm not keeping any secrets from her. I don't know what these other relationships rules are, but well, we do kind of know them, but I don't know them to list them. But there's a big element in the middle there that's not being addressed. And that is the quality of our love, the quality of our attention, the importance that we have, the care that we have. Like that is what actually determines the quality of our relationship. And and so that is the most important quality in a plant dieta. And the reality too is that you can kind of get away with breaking certain rules in a relationship if you're truly in love with someone, if you truly care about someone. All of that can make all of those other things get fixed or, be overlooked or be worked out. And so again, like this is me like jumping to the end of my understanding of the Dieta because I didn't know that, and so in the beginning it was all about, can I have this? Can I have that? Can I eat this? And and it was only like years in to my study where I said, man, just asking is already an expression of where I'm at. And so again, to like put it back to the marriage, what if you asked your spouse, like, is it okay if I have sex with our next door neighbor? It doesn't really matter if you do or not at this point, like you wouldn't be asking if you didn't want to. And the fact that you want to is very meaningful in understanding the dynamics of the relationship. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like maybe one of the ways we could even put this into, say, more anthropological or religious studies language is this idea of relationships established through performative actions, where it's not just about following rules, but that in the actions and the expressions that you undertake in relationship with this other, and here we're talking about the plant, is performative, that it shows your commitment, it shows your desire, it's a way of revealing your inner state. And the most simple way that this is talked about, 'cause, I used to be a religious studies professor, was that one of the examples of the book is that when you see a friend on the street, you say hi and you wave, and that action is performative, and that what it does is it recognizes your connection to that other person and your relationship to that other person, even though it's a very simple act, that it is a way of performing our relationship and maintaining that relationship. And just like you're talking about in a marriage, or an intimate relationship, a large part of the interactions are performative in this nature, and that they are revealing the nature of our connection and what we want to maintain and have be established within that relationship. So it's not just a matter of, did you follow the rules, but are you actually doing the performative actions, and do the performative actions communicate the intent and meaning behind them in a way that is sufficient to maintain the relationship and achieve those ends. Like the same way when people get married and the priest or the judge or whoever asks you, do you take this man, when you say I do, that's a performative statement that says I am committing to this relationship and what we're establishing here. So it sounds like that's kind of a large part of what's taking place within this dieta between the human and the plant.
Definitely. I love what you just said. That was brilliantly articulated. Thank you. I think this is going to be a good conversation. So yes, there is an element that then takes it kind of to the next level, though. When you have two humans, typically you're not capable of reading each other's thoughts. Usually. And so there is a reliance on your behavior,
yes,
to express that. And that also kind of opens the door for deception. You can say one thing and think another.
Right.
But that is impossible when you're doing a plant dieta, because the being that you're entering into this relationship with can read your thoughts. They do know what you're thinking. And so you cannot be deceptive to a plant spirit. And so then the plant dieta becomes just, who are you? And you make your effort to be the best person that you can be for this relationship, for this plant dieta. And it is a very effort-based measurement of the relationship. And I think that we recognize that as well. While we can't read the minds of our partners, we do get to know them. When you're married, you definitely know, probably better than anyone else on the planet, your partner. And so like where their weaknesses are, their strengths, and you might not be able to read every thought, but you do know a lot about what's going on. And so you know what they're capable of, and you know when they're giving their best effort. And that's what matters. And this is another level of realization, that I mentioned took a decade for me to come to find, which was that it's not even outcome based. And I use an example often, like if your partner is a terrible cook, there it's not a criticism, it's just a fact. Like they've cooked meals and they're not good, and they though decide they're going to bake a birthday cake for you, and they take all the time to do it and put all their effort into it, and yeah, it's not delicious by any means, but it doesn't even matter because you know that they're not good at doing this. And yet they put so much effort into it that that's like what you taste, like it's the meaning of a gift like that is not based on the outcome. Or maybe when your child makes like a crappy ashtray out of clay and brings it home for Father's Day, you're not like, I could buy a better one than that at Walmart. Like you would never. It has nothing to do with it. It's everything to do with effort. And plant spirits are very much in this dynamic of the relationship formed in a plant dieta, like a very loving character or parent or our partner, in that they are very effort based. And that to me was also a very important realization, that this is not outcome based and definitely effort based. And if it's hard for someone to do something and they try 3 times harder than the person that it's easy for, then to me, the person that tries 3 times harder is rewarded. So maybe that would be the next segue into like, what do we get out of this relationship? What's the purpose for the relationship? Because that's kind of the whole thing here, right? Like doing a plant dieta, it's not just because it sounds cool to have a friend who's a plant, although it is cool. But there is a lot that comes with it. Plant spirits are biologically millions, tens, 100 million years older than us. Like they are many, many, many times more wise and more connected to a wisdom that we would love to gain more access to, which is why we drink ayahuasca or we take San Pedro or other plant medicines. And by forming a relationship with them, essentially I want to now shift it, because I know I've started with the metaphor of relationship, but we're essentially starting to plant that seed in our own consciousness, the garden of our own consciousness. And that voice of guidance and insight begins to speak in our own head. Now, sometimes in the beginning stages, it's recognizable when you're dieting a plant that, oh, this isn't me talking. Like the plant spirit is talking. Sometimes if you're in an ayahuasca ceremony and you are literally looking at the plant spirit and it is communicating to you, without a doubt, that's the plant spirit communicating, and this is me listening or responding or watching. But as the plant dieta develops, if you cultivate it, and that's why I like planting the seed, then the voice begins to sound more like your own. Mm-hmm. It becomes a part of who you are. It's still an insight. It's still an intuition. And if we want to go deep into that, what is intuition? What are ideas? How do they come into our heads? Like we attribute them to ourselves, but I don't know how they get there. I just recognize that they are there. And it's similar to that in the sense that you will have an idea. And not just an idea, but you will have a knowledge. You will have a faith. You will just know, the way that intuition works, that this is the path to take, or this is the thing to do, or this is what needs to happen or be done. And so ultimately, doing plant dietas gives us this enhanced connection to nature, which looks like an enhanced form of intuition. Now, in an ayahuasca ceremony, that looks very different. I'm trying to use a language that I hope will be understandable, but in an ayahuasca ceremony, it just breaks the boundaries of the Western paradigm in the sense that you're singing, the curandero rather is singing to call their dietas, the spirits of the plants that they have dieted, to be with them in the ceremony, and those spirits show up. And then they work in collaboration. So the spirits work alongside the curandero, or the curandero at some points is directing the spirits to assist them in understanding people's illnesses, understanding the treatments for those illnesses, or actually doing the healing work in the ceremony. And so that is really what makes a curandero, or shaman a shaman in the Amazonian tradition, is that they have relationships with people and friends in high places where they can call these spirits to be with them in ceremony. And then through the collaborative effort of working with these spirits, they can achieve healing right there in the moment, and also achieve guidance as to how to prepare a remedy the next day, for example, and how better to understand the roots and the nature of people's illnesses.
Oh, but there's so much that's interesting that you've just shared here in this section, and something that I really wanted to pick up on is the description that you gave of as the relationship develops with the plant spirit, that first you are perceiving and experiencing it essentially as a voice and thoughts outside of your own, and then as that relationship deepens, that you're experiencing it more as your own thoughts, your own inner voice. And there's just a lot of things that I find really interesting about those statements. My own take on reality is I like to refer to myself as a radical non-dualist. So I look at everything as an expression of the universal self, the universal consciousness, and that at the deepest levels of reality, in my experience, there's really only one consciousness that exists. And, we're fragmented out into these different perspectives and different entities and different perspectives on self and other. But of course, a necessary ingredient for any kind of relationship is that there must be a distinction between self and other, right? So if I'm going to have a relationship with you, you've got to be different than me, right? So if you're establishing your relationship with the plant, it has to be different from you. But then as the more you integrate it and the more you trust it, the more it becomes an aspect of yourself. And something that I'm reminded of there is in the Tibetan tantric Buddhist tradition. Like when they start out a novice monk, it's all about bowing down before statues and bowing down before the guru. And then eventually, as you move on in the tantric path, you internalize that more and more. I mean, I'm just seeing a lot of parallels here, that you internalize that now you're not bowing down to the statue of the tantric deity outside of you, but then you're visualizing it in your inner mind and bowing down to it. And then you are visualizing yourself as the deity. And then you are dissolving the deity into the emptiness of the clear light of the mind, so that you can reach the non-dual state of the Buddha mind, where it's perceived as actually all these distinctions between self and other are ultimately artificial, though we are housed in different vehicles, right? So your vehicle, the vehicle of Carlos, is different than the vehicle of Martin, is different from the vehicle of the plant. But that this is the way that we access these deeper levels of knowledge, and that sometimes maintaining those relationships is then what is most efficacious. For example, as you mentioned in the ayahuasca ceremonies, with bringing in the spirits to assist with the healing, that's a maintenance of a relationship. And that sometimes when we get really intimate, then there's the dissolving of the relationship, because the identity bleeds over into, well, this plant is now a part of me, right? And this wisdom, this is part of me, and I have access to it because I am this in this sense, right? So that's my non-dual take on things. But it's interesting to see these different levels expressed through these different shamanic traditions and in your own experience with the plants.
Right. Well, I'm again, like, man, brilliantly articulated. Like, good, great job. I'm learning a lot. I'm gonna try to learn some of these articulations myself. It made me think, especially like just hearing the radical non-dualism definition. I defined myself as a monistic idealist, so the same
Mm-hmm.
idea, same
Yeah.
almost exactly. But I do that because I read a book, and honestly, I wish I could remember why I read the book because it seemed like so out of left field for me. But it was Bernardo Kastrup, and he wrote a book called Brief Peaks Beyond, and he introduced me to the term monistic idealism. I mean, his book did, and but I think it also it speaks to it, and maybe it speaks in a way that is more understandable for the average listener who might not be studying plant medicine or Buddhism, but that it presented ideas, and it presented the idea that there is one consciousness, and that it fractals, as you put it, into all these different manifestations. And he used a beautiful imagery, which was a whirlpool in an ocean. So, you've got the whirlpool, and the whirlpool has a shape, and I could point to it. I've got a name for it. I could point to it to you, and you could see it too.
Yeah.
But yet, it's just the ocean.
Yeah.
But it's like this beautiful like connection. I love that imagery. But I read that entire book, and then I remember I was like talking about it to my friends, and as we hope to do when we read an interesting book. And slowly the principles of the elements of the theory became more than ideas for me. I began to embrace them. I began to have emotional connection to them. I began to believe them. So now they weren't just ideas. Now they became a part of my emotional body, and as opposed to simply residing in my mental body. So I would like to say that they condensed. They were vapor, and now they've condensed into the liquid flowing of my emotions. And then as I took these ideas into ceremonies, they solidified. And so they turned from the liquid down into truth in my being, in
Mm-hmm.
my body. And then once they did that, this wasn't an idea anymore. This was truth. It was my truth. But that truth started to pervade into all of my thoughts. It became the overarching principal foundation of my reality in such a wonderful way. I mean, it radically like transformed the way that I view everything. Because as you, I'm sure, experienced when you came to the idea, like it's just the way that for me, I want to just say it, but I'm obviously sharing my view. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's just the way it is. And that I think is because I think we've all been there. I think we've all like had an idea introduced to us. And then through that process we've found ourselves believing in it. And then to deepen it further, it's become like our truth. And this particular truth is quite powerful in its like universality. But even if it's just a small truth, the process of starting out there and becoming in here is similar to how you start a plant dieta, and yes, the spirit is out there, but somehow it ends up in here. But I do like the garden concept of it because, as you mentioned, there's a maintenance involved, and so you can't just like make a friend and then never call them and never see them and never hang out with them or even think of them. They won't stay your friend. That relationship can fade away. We all have relationships that probably have faded away. But and so in like a garden, you can't just plant the seed and walk away. Usually it requires some attention.
Yeah.
You want to tend to the garden. You want to maybe pull the weeds, or even if it does grow, but you never come back to the garden again, then it doesn't matter. In this case, diets are often done with trees, although they're done with all sorts of plants. But I like the tree metaphor because when you do get to a certain degree, and this is also true of friendships, then you can take a lot more time away. I've got friends that I don't see and haven't seen for years, but yet I know that the second that we're together, we will be just the way that we were the last time. And, that's when you know you have a true friend. And so I do think dietas get to that point, but along the way, it does require maintenance. It does require attention. And it's not like it's required, again, like it's that nuance, like you can't force yourself to be good friends with someone, like it's just who you are. You either resonate with someone and you want to think about them and you want to reach out to them and you want to connect with them, or you don't. And that to me was kind of the final lesson that I'm at, or at least before the next one with the Dieta, is that you just do the best that you can, but you're always just you.
Yeah.
And that's where it is.
And do you feel it goes the other direction as well? That for example, a plant may be more interested in you than you are in the plant, or that you really want to have a relationship with the plant? It's like, no, I'm not for you. In the same way as we approach our human friendships or other relationships. I mean, even with animals, or it doesn't have to be a human. We have relationships with all kinds of things.
That is a great question. My first response, and I was nodding when you said it, was yes. But I guess nothing is as simple as we want it to be, right? Because you're never going to be the same person either. You're always going to be who you are, but who you are today isn't even who you were yesterday. So in a relationship where you might have met someone 5 years ago and it wasn't in the cards, they didn't feel it, maybe you did, and then 5 years later that could totally flip where now they're like pursuing you and you're not that interested in like it, so in that sense, like, yes, I want to say that happens where you might feel that you want to build this relationship with the plant and the plant's like not feeling it, or in vice versa. I did my first Neurau Dieta because Neurau came to me in ceremony and handed me a cup in my vision, which I drank. And that was like a blatant invitation to do a plant dieta after that ceremony. Actually, I wondered, am I doing a plant dieta right now? Like, did I start my dieta in that vision? And so I said, well, I better do the plant dieta then. Like, let me like get it in my hands in physical middle realm dimension, the one that I'm most used to, and drink this stuff for real, and and do this. I was game for it though. I definitely was game. I could have been like, I don't know, not feeling it. I obviously, it's hard to imagine, but I could have like responded that way.
Yeah. So let's talk more about this now. So we've really gone into sort of the theoretical, the overarching view of what is taking place in the Dieta. But I think this is a great way to get back into your own personal development within this specific practice. So was this your first introduction into Dieta as you were handed this cup? Okay. Well,
yeah.
Then maybe
let's back it up.
Let's back up a little bit and let's talk about how you actually got into it and sort of the different steps along the way and the plants that you developed relationships with. And this is all just really fascinating. So again, just thank you for your time today, Carlos, and sharing this.
No worries, man. I always want to talk about this And it was like with you too, because it's such a complex topic and it just can't be touched on. And I think in our talk, you were like, can you give a brief
Yeah.
explanation of what a dieta was? And I was like, no way. So I'm so thankful that you asked me on. So yeah, so I mentioned my first teacher, Don Juan. Basically, just it wasn't even on the table. I wanted to do dietas because he was telling me about the dietas he did, and they were what he was attributing as the reason why he had the abilities he had. And that's what we hopefully touched on enough to have a basic understanding of. Then, after 4 years, I moved out of his house and I ended up working with Daniel Tilia. And I love Daniel Tilia. Fantastic person, just super fantastic. She was not an ayahuasquero, just to lay that out. She was a vegetalista. And that's kind of when I started to see, oh shit, there's some different like branches in this field. And so she didn't start drinking ayahuasca till late in life, or at least in the indigenous practice, it would be late in life as a teenager.
Yeah.
She was like 18, I think, when she started drinking ayahuasca. And it wasn't to be a curandera. I mean, to be an ayahuasquera, rather. But she started when she was like 8, learning how to make plant medicines. So she treated everything with plant medicines, and then she used ayahuasca to check in to see how well those plant medicines were working, or to check in to see what plant medicine she could make for a new patient or someone coming along. So, which is certainly part of it. Whereas the ayahuasquero, my first teacher, he healed in the ceremony. His work was the ceremony. So going to the ceremony, and then the plant medicines that he used was just to aid the work that he was doing in the ceremony. So it might sound similar, but there was a very big difference. And the big difference could be seen if you did an analysis of the Icaros, the songs that he sang. So the songs that he sang were to the plants that he had dieted, and they were directions for healing. That, if you translated them, you could tell like this person is directing healing to be done in right now. Whereas Daniel Tilia's was appreciation. Their songs saying thank you. Some songs were lullabies, children's songs, songs off the radio. They were, not, they didn't have a direction of healing because they weren't intended to be healing. They were a space for her to enhance her ability to see and to connect.
Yeah, well, that's such an interesting distinction because it sounds like the one set you're describing is more on the lines of establishing the relationship, right? Like a lullaby or singing praise, where that's where you're establishing a connection. But once you reach a level of comfort, like when you first meet a new friend, you don't tell them what to do, right? You say, hey,
Right.
what do you want to do? But then later, as your relationships deepen, then you can give people directions and it's not taken as an affront, right? It's taken, oh, well, I have a relationship with this person and I respect their view or their opinion and they're telling me to do something and I will do that out of respect for the relationship that we have. So even there in the songs, it's really showing that the establishment phase is done. And now we're in the working relationship phase where we can give each other directions and instructions. And it probably goes the other way as well because the plant is probably also instructing the person at the same time.
Right. Well, I mean, it's two very unique ways of looking at what healing looks like, which was fantastic for me as a student to like have my next teacher have this so different approach. Like I really, that's why I wanted to study with her, because I was like, wow, this is like so different.
Yeah.
And my first teacher, he used like 5 plants out of ceremony. So he used ayahuasca, and then outside of ceremony, he'd make a couple teas, he'd use a purgative, but that was it. It wasn't very much treatment outside of ceremony. And that's what I thought. I thought, at that, I'm a novice, so I thought, this is it. Like, this is the tradition. And then Don Yotilio, like ceremonies, yes, but like 100 different plants outside of ceremonies, all different kinds of remedies. Everything gets a different remedy. And that was more in line with a Western point of view, like you'd be like, oh, your kidney, this plant is good for the kidney.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, your liver, this plant is good for the liver. Oh, your heart, this plant is good for the heart. This is good for the lungs. This is good for this is good for that. That's kind of like the way that Westerners tend to think, because that's what we do with pharmaceutical medication. But anyway, she gave me my first. Sorry, there's so much. So it's like this like whole ocean. Try to like narrow it in. She gave me my first dieta, and yes, I said gave me, and that might be an important detail also. The dieta that she gave me was ajo sacha, and ajo sacha could be called wild garlic. It's not garlic by like biologically or botanically, but it has the flavor and the taste, and it's often used in similar way. But it's something that increases mental acuity, so it would often be considered to be like a beginner dieta, like a dieta to start, because it would increase focus and increase your mental discipline. And then now maybe we can just say why did I say gave me?
Yeah.
So you can do a plant dieta on your own, meaning that you can just make a decision. I want to connect with this plant, and so I'm going to make a preparation of it, and I'm going to like set an intention, and I'm going to ingest it with that intention, and I'm going to follow the rules and concentrate, and strive for a connection. And honestly, it could work great. But typically, you want to have someone who has already dieted that plant do what's called open the ceremony for you. And I'm sorry, open the dieta for you, which is done in a ceremony. But to open the dieta for you basically means that they're going to negotiate the terms on your behalf. So it is, again, going back to the marriage being a contract, a dieta is also a contract. So except that the terms of the contract, maybe we could learn a lot from this in marriage, because if you look at the success rate of marriage, it might need a a tweak or
Yeah,
two.
an upgrade.
But the timing of it, it's a set amount of time. So you're going to dieta, you're going to do it for a set amount of time. That's the key, a very key term, probably the most important term of the dieta. How long am I going to do this? And if you've never met this spirit before, you have no relationship with this spirit, then it's kind of maybe understandable that you don't have much like bargaining power, negotiation, or can you even negotiate, because you don't even have a connection? Like, are you even able to communicate? Because that's the purpose of doing the dieta. So if you have someone that already has that relationship, then on your behalf, they'll set those terms. And oftentimes it's your teacher. So this is like, I use the example like going to a fancy dinner where you're an actor trying to get into Hollywood, and you happen to have a friend that knows a lot of directors. And so you go to the party with them, and they're like, hey, Martin Scorsese, I want to introduce you. This guy's a great actor. I think he'd be great in your next film. And like, oh, yeah, Peter Jackson. I think the next star is this guy, and make those introductions. The likelihood that you're going to get a part would be a lot higher. Does that mean that you can't go to the party by yourself and try to make friends? No, that might work too. So I'm not saying it has to be done one way or the other, but it is often done where your teacher vouches for you essentially and opens the dieta for you by making that introduction for you. And that's often done in a ceremony, or always done in a ceremony. And so she opened that dieta for me with ajo sacha. But I had never done a dieta before. And, I was like very hung up on the dieta is the food. Like I was like, well, I'm not going to eat this and not going to eat that and not going to eat this. And that's how I like perceive the dieta. And even then, like there was a a recognizable difference in my mental acuity. Like my focus, I became, I don't know, like mentally enhanced through that process. But I didn't really feel like I actually had a connection. It was like taking a medicine.
Mm-hmm.
You take a medicine and you might notice that it does something. But I didn't feel like I was connecting with the spirit. I never saw the spirit. I never heard the spirit. I never like felt like we had developed any sort of relationship. But I was just starting out, so the fact that I even had something happen, I was like, oh, that's a dieta, you know, that's like what happened. And I put it into like the terminology kind of, I was like, oh, ahosacha made my brain work better,
Yeah.
Which fair, fair. I'm not like denying that, but it wasn't, I still didn't know what a dieta was. I had done one supposedly, but looking back, I don't even know if I want to say that I did it because my focus was far too heavy on what I was eating. And like to me, the dieta was it only happened when you sat down at the table. That was like the
Mm.
dieta.
Yeah.
Once you get up from the table, yeah, the dieta doesn't happen until you get come back for the next meal. And that's not true.
Yeah.
That's a very poor understanding.
Yeah. So
The
you
dieta
were
is
thinking in
24 hours.
yeah, you were thinking in very specific concrete terms of this
Yeah,
action, this result, and it's confined to what you're just putting into your mouth.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a dieta, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the whole problem with why I don't like the idea of calling it dieta.
Yeah. So where did you move on to from there? And
I didn't study with Doña Otilia very long, and not because of anything with her. I like I said, I love her so much. She's just a wonderful person. She was also like not just handing out all of her wisdom either. But it wasn't something that I would ever knock someone for. We can't ever expect someone to tell us everything that they know, even though that's what we hope that they'll do. But I met Don Enrique while working with her, and when I met Don Enrique, he did that. So whereas when I talked to Doña Otilia, sometimes she'd be treating a patient, and I would ask her what was in the remedy she was treating them with, and she wouldn't give me specific answers. Like to keep it a secret, her secret recipe,
yeah.
and and so it was hard to like feel that I was her student if she was going to keep those types of secrets. But Don Enrique didn't keep anything. The very first time I ever met him, he just shared everything he knew. I was like taking full advantage, just asking all these questions. And of course, he talked a lot about dietas. And so once I started working with him, the very first time I worked with him, it was to open a dieta. And that was with Ayauma. And
And
so
did
that,
he select the plant or did you?
yeah, no, he did, yeah. And that gets into like this whole other world of complication where there are ideas within traditions. Some traditions think that you need to start with this plant or these types of plants. And some think that that doesn't make a difference, or that you can start on what would maybe perceived as a higher plant. And I say that because ajo sacha, like I said, is kind of like in some traditions viewed as a beginner plant,
Mm-hmm.
and Ayauma isn't. Ayauma would be like, oh, like you need more experience before you can start to diet Ayauma. But he obviously didn't think that. And I'm thankful of that. But also his reasoning to me was sound. He said that, it's about a person. It's like, whether you've dieted these plants or not doesn't mean who you are. You're still, you can still be lazy. Even if you've done 5 dietas, does that mean you're ready to diet this plant? Or you have done 0 dietas, but you're not lazy. You have this level of understanding, or you have this level of understanding. Like, we're all different. We all come into our educational experience with a level of education. It might not be specific to what we're studying, but of course it will have an influence, of whatever it is that we bring with us, will always have something, and I was always very organized. I was always like an organized person. And to me that like lends itself to being able to do certain things that organization, helps. I think that Dietas, like having a level of organization, is helpful, but way deeper than that, there's stuff that you can't really identify. And that's just how relationships are. Like, we love a person and we can list some qualities about them,
Yeah.
but it's never like that list.
Right, right. It's not because of these specific things that you love someone because you love them. And then you might identify, well, these are certain aspects, but it's just that energy is there. That's the
Right.
reality. So there's love there. Yeah.
Right. And so that's what determines like whether you're ready for a particular relationship or not. And then we know that. What I just said, we all know. We have friends that they weren't ready for a relationship. And then at a certain point, they were ready for a relationship. And sometimes that just means that they met that person. And I guess that's the complication. But at least when we put it in those terms, we have an idea, even if it's hard to articulate. Although you're great at articulation, so maybe you can figure out how to say it.
Yeah. Well, it just seems like it just comes down to compatibility, right? That here your teacher feels that, well, this is a more advanced plant, and no, you haven't worked through the steps, but you're ready for it. In the same sense that, some children go to school and that they're identified like, oh, you're ready for advanced placement, right? That you're ahead of schedule or whatever it is. And so it's just a recognition of what you're bringing and where the compatibility is, in the same sense that, if a friend is going to set you up with someone on a date, that the better friend it is who knows you the best, right, and knows this other person the best, was like, oh, I think you guys are really going to hit it off. It's not a
Right.
guarantee, but you can trust that insight. And it sounds like this trust, kind of with everybody involved, both the teacher and yourself and the plant, that there has to be this level of trust between all the parties involved in order for the relationship to work, as well as following the rules and then trusting, when can I inquire about breaking the rules? Because I trust the relationship, right? Or bending the rules.
Right. Well, that's where we're just getting to like the preliminary level. Like, that was my first dieta, I would say.
Yeah.
I did the Ajo Sacha dieta with Otilia, but I don't really call it my dieta. This was my first dieta, and it was also my first time working with Don Enrique. I mean, technically, I had drank ayahuasca with him once before, but I like entered into this dieta, 6-week dieta with him, pretty much like right off the bat, and that was a lot because we were just so on the same page. Like we clicked. Like, when I met him, within hours, like, I was like, this guy's awesome. And then when I drank ayahuasca just that one time, like, that was over. Like, whatever I had been doing was the end. It just ended. And now, like, this new thing will begin, a new path, working with him. And so that was 2009. So 2010 in February, I did that first dieta with Ayauma. And man, holy shit, like, that was next level for sure. Also, though, I just did everything he said. There wasn't really a question about it. I just did everything he said, and he was my new teacher, and so I
Yeah.
just I'm in. I'm all in.
So
And
take us through those 6 weeks. What did that entail?
yeah, well, I was learning Icaros, so that was a big part of it. And normally, like if you're going to do a dieta, then you want to be able to call that plant spirit to you in your dietas. Also in ceremony, learning about like ceremony navigation, and I was just like, I learned more in the. I had been 6 years in, 6 years in when I did that dieta with him, and I learned more in that 6 weeks than the 6 years. And part of that is just because he is a fantastic teacher. I mean, he was just a brilliant teacher. Also, a part of that was that we did click. I was ecstatic to be there. All these like pieces were coming together, just the perfect setup for all of it. And he gave me this like level of respect that Doña Otilia had done as well, but he was kind of taking it to another level for me, at least the way I felt that he was treating me, like that I was a future curandero,
Mm-hmm.
that I hadn't thought of it. I hadn't come to a realization the way that he would presented it to me, and that allowed me to see it that way. It was like the first time in 6 years that I really thought, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna actually be a curandero. I'm not just gonna be like a gringo that pretended to do what they do. That I'm actually going to do it. And that's so much of the challenge of like communicating, and why relationships is our only hope of understanding, because there's just too much going on that gets us to the belief systems that we have. There's just too many things to try to describe what gets you to that point where you decide I love you to the person in your relationship. You can't, it's just impossible to try to describe it. And I use that because I like got to that point where I just had faith, and that to me was the key component. And that to me is why my dieta was so profound. And that was the most profound experience of my entire life, where I sat in ceremony and I opened the ceremony during my dieta, and I sang the Icaros that I had learned during the dieta, and I called Ayauma to be with me as I had learned was the process, but this was now like real. Like because of that faith, this wasn't kind of it wasn't out there. It wasn't like, oh, now this is when they would do that and I'll do what they do. Kind of like what you were describing earlier. It was now in me.
Right. Internal.
And so when I called to Ayauma came, and he came and he sat down right next to me. And when I say he, I mean like first I saw the tree. It's a tree. It's sometimes called the cannonball tree because of the fruit. They look like cannonballs. And so first I saw the tree, and then he like appeared from behind the tree, which I assume was just like, just so you know, like who I am,
Right.
like here's the tree, here's me, I'm the tree, because if he had just walked up, I don't know, I would have asked who he was anyway, but he would just made totally sure, like, I am Ayauma, see? And he walked up to me. I should say, my eyes were open. This is in the ceremony. I had just sang to him. I had like, I don't know. It's hard to put into words, but he came and sat next to me. And then he produced the fruit, the Ioma fruit, but halved so that it was like a bowl, which you could make out of the shell of the fruit. And he plucked pieces of my visions. You've drank ayahuasca, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So like the kaleidoscope of visions, he like took pieces of them. like right in front of me, just grabbed a piece of a Shipibo design essentially and put it in the bowl. And the bowl, I assume it had liquid in it already, and I assume that was Ioma. I had drank Ioma on the diet to start the diet. And he took like four pieces from different parts of the visual pattern display in front of me that kind of overlays everything in an ayahuasca ceremony. And then he handed me the bowl. And I wish that someone was filming because I'm quite sure that they would have seen me, put my hands
Yeah.
together to take the bowl and would have seen me bring it up to my mouth to drink. Like it was so real, so real. And then when I drank it, it was like I I mean, it was the closest thing I could say to what ego death might be trying to describe. I'm not a huge fan of that term, to be honest, but there was no floor anymore. There was no forest anymore. There was no earth anymore. I was floating in a bright, bright, bright golden space that
Mm-hmm.
went on for infinity in every direction. And yet it had like profoundly bright Shipibo patterns. Or actually, they weren't even Shipibo. They were just nature-like patterns. They moved, but they weren't Shipibo because I remember like there were flowers blooming. And at one point, I tried to look closely at these one group of flowers that were blooming, and they all had little faces when they opened.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said hello,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh shit, like you can talk. And and then I had a conversation with ayahuasca, which was like in her grandest majesty. And I say her, it's kind of funny, but at that time there was kind of a discussion about whether ayahuasca was male or female, because in Peru it was often referred to as abuela, but in Colombia it was often referred to as abuelo, and or padrecita and madre, and so I don't know why I wanted to, but I wanted to settle the debate, so I asked ayahuasca after I had like, humbled myself and thanked so much. I still want to say her, but like the answer was that she is neither male nor female, and that made total sense to me anyway. But then, oh my God, so I was just saying how I wanted to spread this wisdom, and that this was like my life work to try to increase awareness of this wisdom, and and Jesus Christ walked straight out of the pattern, like through a wall, and then stood right in front of me, and I went to get down on my knees, and he said, "Don't kneel before me.
Mm.
You are me."
Yeah.
And then he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You're doing good work." And at that moment, I didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I just was one with the universe. I felt like God,
Yeah.
like not that I felt, some egotistical God. Like I was just, there was no me. There was nothing
Yeah.
separate, just oneness.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long that was. I mean, it was timeless, but obviously it ended. Like at some point, it came to an end. I don't know how long it was. Then I was just back in the ceremony again,
Wow.
and tough to top that one
Yeah.
in my life experience.
That's really beautiful. So many beautiful elements in that. I just had a consultation last week with an individual who had been drinking ayahuasca and doing retreats down in South America, and in one of his last experiences, he said that he was embodying Christ consciousness, and he had all kinds of questions for me about, well, can you embody Christ consciousness, or like, can you channel that, or like, can you access that? What is that? And my answer that kind of reflective of what you were just sharing right here is, I said, well, you are Christ, right? I mean, whatever it is that you think Christ is, that's actually you, because just as you're saying, we're all just God, not from the egoic perspective, but that's really all that we are, is that unitary consciousness. And so whatever you think Jesus is, well, that's you. So, and if you want to talk about it in terms of channeling Christ consciousness, you can, but ultimately it's just you, and so it's just so beautiful in that vision that you had. And just maybe you want to share just a couple things from my own ayahuasca experiences, and this is from years ago now, where I was going through a process of really sort of energetically reformatting, is how I describe it. And for months, that meant that I was just vibrating. I would drink ayahuasca and I'd just vibrate. And so I had to go into another room because I'd vibrate so much I would shake the whole room for everybody else. And so I had to go into this other room. And there was one day when I was just lying there and I was just vibrating away. I mean, my whole body is shaking and my hands are moving and my feet are moving. And I'm lying there and I don't want to break it because that energetic reconditioning was taking place, but I was so thirsty. I was just so thirsty. And I was just like, I just wish I could get some water. But if I get some water, I'm going to have to stop doing this, and it's going to break this current that's running right now. So at that point, as best as I could describe, these star beings came down from outer space, and they were standing over me. And then one of them started pouring what I interpreted as star milk into my throat. And it was so delicious and it was so nourishing. It's like, oh, this is exactly what I need. And then I wasn't thirsty anymore. And so I could vibrate for a while longer. And then months later, as all this reconditioning, this energetic reconditioning was taking place, and it kind of been progressing along with it, we drank, and I was sitting there, and my eyes were closed, and pretty soon, as everything was opening up, just this infinite fractal face came right up in front of me, and my immediate sense was like, whoa, shit, it's ayahuasca. Like, here it is. It's right here. And then this face, it's looking right at me, and it says, don't you want to let me be you? And internally, I was just like, sure. And then and then I became it. And then it just completely took over everything. And, I won't get into the whole story here because I'm interviewing you, but I just wanted to share that with you, that was a pivotal moment for me, in that elements that had been taking place within my 5-MeO DMT experiences suddenly were there in the ayahuasca, with that transition of don't you want to let me be you, and me accepting that, where it became that. And then it was just the pure flow of energy. And as you say, it, along these lines, going back to the non-dual, that it was just, there is no separation, that I am this, that I am the energy of being, and it's ultimately one, and experiencing it filtered through my physical being in that state. And then actually they had to ask me to leave the room because there was so much energy going through me that it was again being disruptive for other people's experiences, and they didn't really know what to do with me. But anyway, that was just a beautiful breakthrough moment for me, and I will definitely always remember that event.
I wish that I remembered more of that God space, but I just there was no me to remember it.
Yeah. That's typical, for especially people with the 5-MeO DMT. It's so rapid, and when they get there, that it's very common for people to, when the ego reestablishes after that event, where there's this complete energetic override that many people don't remember, at least initially, and that with more experience. And I like to tell people, said, well, you've never had a vantage point outside of your ego before, and that's what you have no point of reference for what that was. And as you describe, it's eternal, it's infinite. That you might have been there 1 second or 20 minutes.
Right.
You don't know, right? So there's no reference points there because it is just the ocean of being. And when you're not in the ocean, you are the ocean. There is
Right.
no landmarks. There's no reference points. There's no whirlpools, as you say, or it's just the endless whirlpools of everything. It's just the endless fractal nature of being. It's just.
Well, I love that. I love that we have the concept of the atom. And I read recently that a single human cell has 100 trillion atoms in it, and a single human body has 100 trillion cells. And so me, the me that I like to think of as me, is 100 trillion times 100 trillion atoms.
Yeah.
And each of those atoms is a little solar system, a nucleus with some tiny little planets revolving around it in orbit. And here we are on this little planet orbiting a nucleus in the single atom of which there are 100 trillion in a single cell and 100 trillion of them in a single body of God.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm really excited about the new space telescope that they're launching, like with Hubble, and getting to look where, they focus Hubble on a tiny little section of what looks like black space. And then they focus in and then realize, oh man, there's billions of galaxies right there looking in that direction. And then you move it a little micron and it's like, oh my, there's billions of galaxies over there. So anywhere we look in outer space, there are billions of galaxies, and that's this beautiful fractal expression, as you say, down from the components of the atoms to the cells, to the solar system, to the galaxy, to the universe. We see these same patterns repeated over and over, and that it is all, I do like to call it's the body of God. And then, of course, there's also the mind of God, the awareness, the consciousness, that it's all one. Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that was the key, I think, that came together for me when I read that book by Bernardo Castro,
Yeah.
Brief Peaks Beyond, because that, to try to like put it into simple terms, like the electron is made of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so thus the atom is made of consciousness, and the cell is made of consciousness, and I am made of consciousness, and the planet is made of consciousness, and our sun and the galaxy and the universe. And I use the reference on purpose of our mind as the vapor, high frequency consciousness, and our emotions as the middle frequency consciousness, the liquid. And then our bodies is the low frequency consciousness, the solid.
Yeah.
And that is just basic science, right?
Yeah. And the process of bringing that, this is something that I always like to tell people, is that it's one thing to have the idea that everything is one, but it actually, to make it meaningful, it's something that you have to feel, and it's something that you experience, and that it becomes embodied, right? That it's your lived experience. And where at that point, I think you can't even argue for it, or why would you want to? Because I think, as you said earlier, it's just the way things are. Like when you, and well, that's my perspective, but it really feels like it's just the way things are. And one of the things that gets me is that when other people can reach the same conclusion, that, ultimately this is something you have to discover for yourself, and then you will, I think, come to the same conclusion, like, wow, this is the way things are. And then the acceptance and limit of that is different than just having the idea of it. Like, I was recently asked by some reporter who's writing about 5-MeO-DMT, and he said, have you tried it? And which is kind of a naive question to ask me, but anyway, I said, have you tried it, and how did it change you? And my immediate response to that was, well, I went from being a philosophical non-dualist to being an embodied non-dualist. That I went from having the idea that, I think it's all one, to like, oh, wow, I felt that in every atom of my being. And then it was just undeniable that I don't even believe this, that it's just the way things are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that to me is how I frame the healing process, where we dissolve our detrimental truths
Yes.
and we evaporate them back into the realm of ideas where we can easily say goodbye to them the same way that our thoughts come and go. And we take the beneficial ideas and we condense them and solidify them as truths. And ayahuasca is just this wonderful tool that enables us to be able to do that. But believing in our ability to do that greatly enhances the process. And if you know that you can do that, if it has become your truth, which I am presenting this idea now so that it can be more people's truths, then you are greatly increasing the opportunity to accomplish that goal.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been such a great conversation, Carlos, and I want to keep going, but I do need to go and pick up my son from school. So
Yeah.
I think just like last time, I think that this is where we can leave it for today, and I'm definitely going to have you back on, and we're going to talk more. And I think we can probably even go deeper into Dieta and even your own experience with Dieta. And we're just going to keep this as a rolling conversation because I think you've got a lot to say and a lot to share. And I really appreciate your perspective and experience and your willingness to share these details of your own experience. Even with what you just shared, that I know that that's the kind of thing that some people, they run up against a wall, like, oh shit, I can't tell people that Jesus came out of the fabric of the vision and then told me that I'm him. That's a place where the ego says like, yeah, you can't say something like that. And I just want to thank you for sharing that and just sharing it so plainly and matter-of-factly, and just with the trust in your heart that you can give this information and that it can be received. And I just really appreciate it.
Oh, no worries, man. I love having these conversations and the chance to like get deeper. I often feel at the end of a conversation, I'm always like, I wasted so much time telling the backstory. Like that's not, I don't care if anyone hears my story. I have a message. I want people to understand something about how they can change their lives. I get that the backstory helps to have people like trust what I say, but it's awesome to have a round two. I'd love to get together for a round three too, because I'm right now like putting some cool ideas together about integration and what that actually means and how we can make it real in our lives. So maybe we can get into that a bit too when we get to our third meeting.
Okay. Well, that will be sometime next year. So 2022, we can all look forward to having this conversation and sharing it here on the podcast. But thank you so much for your time again today, Carlos. Really appreciate it. And everything that you've shared. It's just brilliant.
Always a pleasure, Martin. Until we meet again.
Okay. And just to remind the listeners, it's ayahuascafoundation.org is your website. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, to be continued.